Maybe they can fork over some cash. Then President Obama has made it official. All troops in Iraq will be withdrawn by August 2010. Well, all troops. When he says all troops, he's going to leave 50,000. But other than that, all troops are going to be out. Oh. But here is the one thing. The watchdogs of America are apparently dead, or they're asleep. I'm not sure. For evidence, you don't need to look any further than today's headlines. This one I love today from the New York Times. Obama, breaking from a troubled past, seeks budget to reshape U.S. priorities. Then there's the Washington Post. Here's one. Ambitious blueprint, a big risk the president is willing to take. Oh, I hope it turns out well for his sake. And in the LA Times, Obama's budget details and analysis. Okay, you might be saying to yourself, you know, besides there's a lack of imagination in the LA Times, what's wrong, Glenn? Well, let me go through some recent stories that didn't make headlines, but as I read these stories, I'm just going to make one teeny-weeny little change. And you tell me if the media would have reacted the same way, or if the New York Times would have been cranking out special editions while Keith Olbermann is reciting Shakespeare to cover all of this stuff. Today, here are the headlines. You ready? President George W. Bush nominated yet another tax cheat for his cabinet. In an unprecedented move, President Bush asked to move control of the census to the White House. It will now be run by Karl Rove. President Bush quietly okayed massive troop surge in Afghanistan, sending 17,000 additional troops, refusing to hold a news conference or even answer any of the press questions. President Bush said he will leave up to 50,000 troops in Iraq after months of promising drawdown. The night after George W. Bush proclaimed that we all have to make economic sacrifices, President Bush introduced an unprecedented $3.6 trillion budget. Bush raises taxes by $1 trillion to cover out-of-control spending. Bush takes first step towards bank nationalization, buying a 36% share in Citigroup. Now, if you substitute Obama for Bush, those stories go to the front page from, where they are, in E12. Why? How many times did the media crucify George W. Bush over the troop surge? Say, this is never going to work. We've got to leave Iraq immediately. Why, Shakespeare would do it. Here's a quote from the New York Times, the editorial written just as our troops were surging into Iraq. Quote, "It's time for the United States to leave Iraq without any more delay than the Pentagon needs to organize an orderly exit. Whatever Mr. Bush's cause was, it is lost." Wow. I'm sure glad we don't run wars based on op-eds from the New York Times. But it sure would be nice to have some accountability, or at least, what do they always call that? Oh, yeah, a level playing field. May I add one more point? The press also made it look like we didn't win in Iraq. We didn't establish peace and gave Iraqis the control of their lives. Let this member of the, I'm sorry to say this, mainstream media say, thanks, U.S. military. Thanks for your service. Job well done. Dare I say it, mission accomplished. Welcome home, soldier. Soon. The watchdogs have basically become part of the executive branch. So who's left now to watch them? Who's left to provide any kind of checks and balance that we need to keep our leaders in line? I'm sorry to say this, no one but you. We are the watchdogs of our own liberty. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it's always been. We must rely on ourselves. Rely on ourselves. We are the guardians of freedom, and we must not do what they did, play dead or fall asleep.